It has been said before when you cover British politics or you know anything about British politics, when the Tory party is strong and has a strong leader and is united as one, they tend to be quite an unstoppable force. But the question really should be asked of the fact that we have a current Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, with an overwhelming Conservative majority in Parliament, who seems to be essentially doing nothing right. His promises of getting Brexit done are far from being fulfilled. The chaos still in Northern Ireland is still a situation that could still scupper his entire Brexit plan, a deal which, remember, he said was one of the world beating best in the world oven ready deals in history. Again, turned out not to be true. We've had increases in national insurance, which again has had red wall voters up in arms, as well as the cancellation of major infrastructure projects, the eastern leg of the HS2, as well as the Northern Rail powerhouse. And now we are seeing potentially today, even, there could be a rebellion over the plans for social care reform coming from the Tories. Again, another major manifesto promise. We're going to have to see how that plays out today. But what's interesting, of course, is that Boris managed to unite all these desperate factions behind him because many didn't actually like him, but they liked the fact of his personality. It was very, very popular for winning them votes, and they were able to stomach that. As long as, hey, they got into power, they didn't mind. Hence why it has always been said that even though Boris Johnson has this really big majority, he seems to be governing like a prime minister with a majority of 12, which just goes to show you how fractured the party really is behind him. And the fact that they are now all united in anger against him, well, as history has shown us, there's one thing the Tory party are really good at, and that's getting rid of their leaders when they need to be gotten rid of. So this could be a very, very interesting week for Johnson, to say the least. So let's jump into this article then. But before we do that, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me a Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much to all those people who do support the channel that way. So let's jump on with this now. So the title is Boris Johnson has united every Tory faction in anger at him. So let's dive in. Winston Churchill offered this advice about how the Conservative Party should treat its leader. The loyalties which centre upon the number one are enormous. If he trips, he must be sustained. If he makes mistakes, they must be covered. If he sleeps, he must not be wantonly disturbed. If he is no good, he must be poleaxed. Which brings us to Boris Johnson. Tory MPs are tremendously angry with him. They are not quite so furious that they will poleaxe their number one this week, but they are sufficiently incensed to decline to even sustain him and even refuse to cover for him. Large numbers of them withdrew their love in a dramatic public fashion by disdaining to turn up and support him at the most recent Prime Minister's questions, which missed an especially undefying session during which the Speaker had to issue 4 reprimands to the Tory leader for disorderly behaviour. When normally the chamber is rammed for PMQs, the vacant leather green behind Johnson bore silent witnesses to how severely he has angered his parliamentary party. Attendees at a later private meeting of the 1922 the Tory backbenchers described the atmosphere as sullen. It was not much improved by the Prime Minister's belated confession that he had, quote, crashed the car into the ditch. The consensus among Conservative MPs is that their leader's lack of stock with his parliamentary party is plumbing the depths not previously seen. Not even during the blackest stretches of the pandemic, the catalyst of the grotesque mishandling of the Owen Paterson affair and the fierce blowback from it. But there are many underlying sources of discontent. The result that the Prime Minister has managed to almost alienate every Tory faction of significance. The most obvious anonymous development of this is the fury among the Red Wallers, the large number of Tory MPs who entered the Commons just under 2 years ago and sit for formerly Labour constituencies, mainly concentrated in the Midlands and the North. Previously counted as Uber loyalists on the grounds that he won them their seats, they are angry that they have been plunged into the sleaze crisis in number 10, angry that the Prime Minister ducked below the parapet while they were exposed to outrage of voters, and further aggravated that the party suffered so much reputational damage before its leader finally acknowledged that he had blundered. The betrayal of key promises to provide high-speed rail to the north of England has worsened the mood even among those representing areas that have lost out. To add to the lengthening list of grievances, the government now wants to fiddle with the cap on social care in a way that will leave many less affluent pensioners, many of them who live in the Redwall constituencies, paying tens of thousands of pounds more. Boris has still got a bit of capital in the bank, but a lot of that has gone, says a Conservative MP representing a Yorkshire seat. The Red Wallers are sometimes depicted as being a generational conflict with the Red Corduroys, a reference to the weekend trouser wear sometimes favoured by the older Conservatives, MPs sitting for wealthier, more traditional Tory areas. Yet, the corduroy brigade is also extremely disgruntled. Many in this group are engaged in financial rewarding extracurricular activities that are threatened by the tightening of the Tory rules of the MPs' outside jobs. And either an ex-minister or never will be ministers, there are already a very unbiddable by the government's business managers. The whips know not to bother me, says one. The group will be even more ungovernable, if even less forgiving, if the Prime Minister's should-be blandling costs them money. Two of the tribes that have featured most prominently in the recriminations have racked the Tory party over the past 3 weeks, but they are not the only factions that are discontent with Johnson. There is a rumbling from the self-styled Spartans, the Brexit fundamentalists who played such an instrumental role in the collapsing of the premiership of Theresa May, having paid the pass to number 10 for Mr. Johnson. He's giving them the rock-hard Brexit they wanted, but he is not delivering on the domestic programme that they imagined would follow. For an important portion of them, the point of getting out of the EU was to allow Britain to become a low-tax, light-regulation, small-state country, and they are aghast to see the Conservative government raising taxes to the highest share of the economy since the early 1950s. This dissatisfied group overlaps, of course, with the Thatcherites, who have long been suspicious that the Tory leader is not a genuine disciple of the Iron Lady, but a plasticine boy. Boris Johnson doesn't have a conviction in his body, complains one veteran Thatcherite. There's lots of us worrying that this is a conservative. Is this even a conservative government? They tend not to blame the recent tax hiking budget on Rishi Sunak, who most believe is at least one of them at heart, but the spendthrift, haphazard, hardline chasing of his next-door neighbour. Just because the right of the Tory party is unhappy doesn't mean its remaining centrist, of course, are satisfied. Liberal internationalist Tories, the type who tend to stop the government's savage cuts to the aid budget, don't feel that this is their kind of government either. They are aghast that the moderate voters are being repelled by sleaze. The mendacity and incompetence of the cruel bombast of the Prime Minister. Many of us have assumed that Boris was a one-nation Tory who ran London, said the centrist Conservative MP, who backed him for the leadership in 2019. Unfortunately, we've learned that this was just a persona to win London. We've learned that this was not the genuine Boris. There were then, of course, the clunky segment of Tory MPs who never trusted him, who always thought he would be a bad Prime Minister and tried to stop him becoming leader. Residual Cameroons and Mayites may also be found in this group, nursing their resentment about the large role he played in the destruction of his two predecessors. And now I come to the Johnsonites, the probably most loyal band of Tory MPs who can try and sustain him when he trips, cover him when he makes mistakes, and even defend him against all enemies. Except I can't, because there really isn't such a thing as a Johnsonite. He is a highly unusual Prime Minister in not having a strong body of committed supporters who will back him through and through. It is still a struggle to think of more than a handful of Tory MPs who might fight for him to the bitter end. He doesn't have the colleagues who are dedicated to his philosophy because he is an opportunist, not a fixed ideological abode. He doesn't have MPs who are devoted to him because they admire his caliber or consistency of character, because you can't esteem what doesn't exist. He hasn't got loyalists, only lackeys. He inspires no true believers. He simply attracts hangers on, and they will let go of his coattails the moment they conclude that his premiership is irreversibly on a downward trajectory. He became leader not because the Tory MPs thought he would make a decent prime minister, but because they reckoned him for their best bet at winning the last election. His prospects for remaining number one are crucially dependent on one Tory MPs continuing to regard him as a winner. The biggest threat to Mr. Johnson is not the recent drop in the Conservative Party's poll rating, but the larger drop in his personal ratings. Our voters who once shrugged at his character failings because they liked his shtick, because they liked his shtick tiring of the act, has the joke finally stopped being funny? That's what Keir Starmer is hoping, and some Tory MPs report anecdotal evidence that this is beginning to happen among their constituencies. I noticed they don't call him Boris anymore, says one. They just call him Johnson. Our most recent opinion poll recorded approval ratings of his performance as a prime minister at record low. And a lot of things could be at work here. Not just the sleaze, but also the huge waiting list for NHS treatment, looming tax rises, the widening of the vaccine euphoria. And of course, what matters to most of Tory MPs of all is the factions where their leader is an asset who boosts their chances of party of retaining power or drag those who endangers it. One shrewd former cabinet minister notes, if you look back in Tory history, Tory leaders have got done when their ratings were below track below the party. Tories have a number of ruthlessness when they decide that the leader has reached the expiry date. Even winning 3 elections in a row couldn't save Mrs. Thatcher when MPs concluded that she had become a liability. Boris Johnson is not yet in the poleaxe zone, but he is stumbling well into its vicinity. I think that's definitely the case. I think we are, shall we say, seeing maybe this is really, as we said before, the beginning of the end. Like I say, there is meant to be the vote that was talked about the care home reforms either today or tomorrow potentially. We will have to see what that happens. If it gets pushed down the line, then you know why, because they won their concessions for wanting more information about this. Maybe this vote will be canned altogether and they'll go back to the drawing board to redraw it. We don't know. It could be a very interesting time. And again, and yet another potentially interesting week for, shall we say, Mr. Johnson and the rest of his party. But as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a watch donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you all next time.